Awesome. Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. Looks like we're set to go. We are recording this Zoom tonight. So please keep your mics muted as mentioned before, but thank you for joining us. We will be discussing the La Jara Mesa uranium mining project. That is the main focus of tonight's meeting. We're going to be discussing where it's at in its application process and what does it even mean that they filed their application to the state and what is the timeline looking like? What's the historical context of this project? And those different points. So we're really happy that you all are here to learn with us. This is being hosted in collaboration with a number of organizations. We have Dene No Nukes, Anti-Uranium Mapping Project, the Multicultural Alliance for a Safe Environment, Pueblo Action Alliance, and New Mexico Mining Watch with us here tonight to share information. Um, and the main focus too of this is to help you all with your letters because there is an open period right now to submit letters pertaining to this application that was submitted by Laramide Resources. So let's go ahead and move into the next slide. I just also want to ground everybody in like the purpose of us being here together this evening, in defense of our communities, in defense of the land, of Mount Taylor, all of these important aspects are what are aligning us here this evening. And if we go to the next slide, let's see. Thank you so much. Um, So as we get started this evening, I already did kind of lay out the housekeeping of just, keeping your mics on mute, but also if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to use the chat and we can address those as we move along. But we'll also have a Q&A at the end if you want to hold your questions till then so that you can just gain all this information as we move through and maybe your question will even get answered as we move along. But I also want everyone to know that by the end of this evening, you all should have started a draft of a letter. And we are hoping to get everyone to submit a letter by the end of our time together tonight. So be sure you're prepared for that, whether you're taking notes on your laptop or you're taking notes by hand. Just be sure to be ready to absorb all this info and use it in your letters and use it in your advocacy for this. Um, so we'll have various guest speakers today that are a part of the organizations I listed beforehand. They'll be sharing their expertise with everybody. We have a Q&A at the end, as I mentioned, and then of course the letter submissions. So as for our guest speakers, I would like to introduce Leona Morgan, who is Dene. She is a co-founder of Hall No and serves on the Navajo Nation Dene Uranium Remediation Advisory Commission. And she's been fighting against nuclear colonialism since 2007. So she's been in this for a really long time now, has a lot of knowledge on these topics and is a really go hard community organizer and has been doing a lot for our communities across the state and just all the communities who have connections to nuclear colonialism, really. We also have with us Ava Curtis, who is the Environmental Justice Coordinator for the Multicultural Alliance for a Safe Environment. We have Shayla Blatchford, who is Dene and European. She's a documentary photographer and a founder of the Anti-Uranium Mapping Project. And we have Wendy Atsidi, who is Dene from the Eastern Agency. She's an educator, organizer, environmental scientist. Um, and then we also have Sarah on the call from New Mexico Mining Watch, who will be helping us address some questions towards the end of our time today. And since I didn't introduce myself earlier, my name is Alicia Gallegos. I am from the Pueblo of Acoma and the Pueblo of Laguna. I am the climate justice organizer for Pueblo Action Alliance. So that is who is going to be present with us this evening and addressing some questions as well as sharing out all the information we have about this specific project. And with that being said, we can go ahead and get started with our um, breakdown. And I'll pass it to Leona Morgan.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? Is the volume good?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us tonight. I'm going to just give some basic background info and talk a little bit about the history and then hopefully um, get us set up for the next presentation, which will really hone in on why we're all here to learn more about the Jara Mesa uranium mine. So, like Alicia said, I really got started in my activism against uranium in 2007. And so, just going into the history, um, this map here shows in the yellow outlines, those are some of the uh, indigenous lands, which is all in the what's called the Grants Mineral Belt. So along the corridor of I-40 and the railroad around the Grants area, some people call this the Grants Mineral Belt or the Grants Mining District. And so the red outline is what is called the TCP. And I wanted to start with this map because it shows there's three uranium mines that we're concerned about right on the border of the TCP. I'll talk about that in a minute. So the red outline is the Mount Taylor Traditional Cultural Property. And then the two purple dots to the northeast, I'm sorry, the northwest, are one project called the Crown Point Church Rock project, which is an ISL uranium mine. So we're dealing with four proposals of new mining in New Mexico. Two are ISL and two are conventional. And if you could go to the next slide. So tonight we're really going to talk about La Mesa, so you can see on the map, it's right along the border, and then we have two other mines, Roca Honda, and then Grant's Precision, which is in ISR. And so just keep in mind, these are also near another uranium mine that's currently going through reclamation called Mount Taylor Mine. And then around the entire area are also abandoned uranium mines. So even though it's just the map just shows three mines, um, I need to update this so we can kind of get a fuller picture. But go ahead and go to the next slide. So I just have a couple of pictures here. I tried not to put all the words in the presentation so we could just kind of talk and have a conversation. Like I said, I got started mostly because there was a huge threat going back to 2007. You can see in this historical chart, this maps out the price of uranium. So going back to 1990, and then you see that really steep peak around 2007, and it goes down, but it starts to go back up in early 2024. And so this is I would say one cycle of the uranium price going from a very over $130 a pound. I think it was at the height about $140 a pound. And then now it's still pretty high, but not as high as it was in 2007. In 2007, when the price skyrocketed, all these uranium companies were trying to start again. But like I said, it was a uranium bubble. They didn't start. They were claiming to, um, they wanted to carry out what they were calling a nuclear renaissance. And so this idea of nuclear energy, they really didn't talk about weapons at the time, but they were really trying. A lot of companies were basically saying they're going to start mining next year. And we hear this all the time. They're going to start next year. They're going to start next year. But none of them have started. One of the mines we were fighting back in 2007 was Roca Honda. And so several of them were around the Mount Taylor area. And this prompted a lot of activity. There was a lot of organizing that had started. There's a couple pictures here from the Redwater Pond Road community. They had held their first commemoration event in 2009 to talk about the Church Rock spill. And then there's another picture, a different group called Western Mining Action Network. All of these groups really started to become active, and this is when a new coalition had formed, later called the Multicultural Alliance for a Safe Environment, which Ava is going to present next. And so the price of uranium really spurred, the companies to come back. But the thing about it is it also encouraged people to become active and to organize. And so that's one of the things we're trying to do tonight is to notify people this is a time to get involved, to become active, write your letters. And I hope some of you can navigate your screen. So as we're talking, maybe you can even start drafting your letters because of the deadline for requesting a hearing, which we believe is tomorrow. Ava and Wendy will talk more about that. But just going back to the history, in 2009, in 2007, the price was really high. And then because of that, 5 tribes decided to work together to nominate Mount Taylor as a traditional cultural property. And so a large part of that work started in 2008. And it actually created a lot of division. And there was actually in the grants area when they held one of the hearings, a lot of us came to the hearing. It was in a high school gym, and we were there to support the tribes nominating the mountain. This TCP, what it did was give the tribes a seat at the table. It did not prevent mining, it did not stop new mining, but it allowed for notification and for the tribes to get involved because of the cultural significance of the mountain, and not just the peaks, but the entire region. So, like, even the lava flow around Mount Taylor is in some of our, as a Diné person, it's in some of our creation stories. And so during that time, the the industry was very opposed to Mount Taylor being protected as a cultural property. So they actually took it to court, and we didn't see the TCP finalized until 2014. And so this is just some of the background that shows how much work went into fighting uranium. It wasn't just, activists and nonprofits, but the tribes took an active role. Like I said, it was really intense. There was one meeting in Grants, one of the hearings for the TCP, where it was in a high school gym, and one side was all the natives coming to comment, and then the other side was largely non-natives, and it became racially divided and in pretty it was actually for me one of my first meetings, and I thought, this is it was almost like I hate to say, but the term cowboys and Indians, where there was this really, strong divide, kind of what we're seeing again today with the push by the Trump administration and what the Republicans are doing, especially in this atmosphere of ICE and all of the immigration stuff. So just to move forward, yeah, there was a lot of things going on. And later, fast forwarding, after the price of uranium went up around in 2000, it was still, kind of hovering at a high rate. But in 2011, the Fukushima Daiichi disaster occurred in March 2011, sorry. And that's when the price of uranium took a big hit, and a lot of the nuclear projects around the world were canceled. And it was a horrible thing to have this disaster, but it actually helped us because the different world states saw nuclear as dangerous, and so a lot of things kind of were canceled, and this is one of the things that contributed to the price of uranium going down, and then some of the companies backing off. But That was in 2011. Now, fast forward to 2018. This is when the push for new nuclear started to increase again. So, for myself personally, I attribute a lot of this to the 2018 United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They put out a report saying that nuclear is low carbon, low greenhouse gases. Can you switch to the next slide? So you can see the uranium fuel chain. This is an infographic here. The measurement of the carbon footprint of nuclear is mostly taken at the power plant. So the power plant is the last step in the nuclear fuel chain for energy. This infographic doesn't include the weapons aspect, but basically they don't count any of the stages before. So the uranium mining, the processing, the milling, the enrichment, the fuel fabrication, all of that, and then the waste. And then even after the power plant is the high level radioactive waste that is it has to be contained forever. It needs to be recontained every so often, which also has its own carbon footprint. So none of this is counted in that IPCC report, but that's what a lot of the governments go by, that nuclear is low carbon or clean. And then in 2023, Biden at the United Nations convening of parties, the meeting on climate change, also known as the COP, he committed to triple nuclear energy development by 2050. And so Biden, the United States, and 22 other countries, they all are pushing for tripling their nuclear energy output by 2050. Now it's over 30 countries. And so these are some of the things that started this new uranium bubble. And then the next year in 2024, the US started its process for stopping purchasing uranium from Russia. So we were buying a lot of old Russian weapons that we were downblending to use for energy. And then at the same time, after Trump was elected, all these other things started to happen. So this so-called energy emergency. In March 2025, he passed 4 nuclear executive orders. And this is when some of the new mining started in the Southwest. So in Utah and Arizona. And then now we're seeing in New Mexico, a lot of these old uranium mining claims and properties are starting to move forward. And some of this actually started, we can go all the way back to the 1872 mining law. And so some of it is really from the beginning of the settler colonization of our country, that mining was used as a tool of basically stealing our land. So some of these old properties go back to as far back as 1872. So right now, just to wrap up, we're dealing with a huge push for new nuclear. And we can see it. Some folks are aware of the connection between AI data centers. There's a push to restart old reactors, to do life extension of existing reactors to, continue their operation. And then now we're hearing about small modular nuclear reactors, which really are not online and don't really exist, but there's a lot of money and support for that by the government. And even in New Mexico, we have Senate Bill 78, which will be heard in committee tomorrow. So in Santa Fe, in the morning, the Senate Conservation Committee is going to vote on Senate Bill 78, which basically is saying nuclear is a renewable energy. And we know that's not true because uranium is not renewable. It's a finite resource. And you can see in the bottom picture, unfortunately, this big push for new nuclear and new mining is also gaining support. And I'm really embarrassed to say this, but some of our leaders in the Navajo Nation are now supporting nuclear energy. So in that bottom picture, that's the executive director of the Navajo Nation EPA, Stephen Etcity, who is testifying in the committee Saturday in support of new nuclear. And so right now, the Navajo Nation has a law that says no uranium mining, but I'm very concerned that they could get rid of that law. We had a law that said no transport of uranium through the Navajo Nation, but they changed that law to say instead of prohibiting it, we're going to regulate it. So there's also new transportation regulations that are up for public comment in the Navajo Nation. And so we're seeing a lot of support for new nuclear And even some of our allies think it's a solution to climate change. And we know that it is not true, that it's a false solution to climate change. So we have a lot of work to do. There's across the board a lack of regulations for mining or how to the transportation, how to manage the waste, not just at the state level, but even the U.S. Forest Service and BLM really don't have good regulations on this stuff. And so I'm just going to wrap up by saying, we are all here to help encourage folks to write letters tonight. And this is just the first mine that's moving forward in New Mexico. We could see this process move forward with the Roca Honda mine and then Grant's Precision and we don't know if there's other new mines that might pop up as well. But just remember, we have to also look at the cumulative impact of these three mines all on Mount Taylor, right next to old mines and abandoned mines. And so we hope that everyone will send letters tonight. And then if those other mines start to move forward, encourage folks to also get involved and organize and help us to protect our sacred mountain, our cultural properties, our drinking water, and basically the future of our New Mexico. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Leona. I think you did a really amazing job of like setting that historical context behind the nuclear fuel cycle and how it has existed here in New Mexico for decades, or you're even going back centuries with that the Mining Act in 18 late 1800s. I can't remember the exact date. But yeah, this exists in all of our backyards, from the most northern part of the state down to the most southern part of the state. There's some point of the nuclear fuel chain taking place, which is why it is so important for us to mobilize right now. And with Leona emphasizing the fact of like where we are at politically in this moment and why we're seeing an increase in the price of uranium, with the push for nuclear energy, and also if you geopolitically, like where we're at in terms of the state of like the military industrial complex as that takes place here in New Mexico as well with the production of nuclear weapons. So yeah, that was a very beautiful roundup of the history and then where we're at right now. I hope everyone wrote down that bill that she mentioned earlier to follow that to make sure we don't see nuclear energy come to our state in New Mexico. But now we're going to dive into a little more specifics around the La Jara Mesa mine. And so I'll pass it to you, Ava.
Yeah, thank you guys. I'm Ava. I'm with MACE, the Multicultural Alliance for a Safe Environment. And, Leona already mentioned this, but La Jara Mesa is just one of 4 sites we have being proposed in New Mexico. 3 of these sites are near Mount Taylor, Roca Honda, Grants Precision ISL, and La Jara Mesa. The other one is Church Rock Crown Point. So this will kind of help you visualize the location we're talking about. So the location of the La Jara Mesa mine is in the Ambrosia Lake District, Cebolla County, New Mexico, 11 miles northeast of the town of Grants, on the edge of Mount Taylor, a culturally significant site for many indigenous communities, as was mentioned. So this photo here, you can see where Church Rock is, where La Jara Mesa is, where the county line is, the border of Navajo Nation. So hopefully that kind of helps you visualize what we're talking about here in the area we're talking about. And this is just a really lovely picture of the mountain of Mount Taylor. So this is something Leona touched on a little bit, but why are we seeing this now? There's the Trump administration executive order declaring an energy emergency, federal pressure to increase domestic mining, and increase demand for nuclear energy. Another thing that wasn't mentioned earlier, but is important here, is that uranium was added to the critical minerals list in 2025. That is a list maintained by the federal government of minerals they deem to be critical to national security or national interests. And when something's on that list, it can mean faster permits approvals, it can mean subsidies, and just general support for mining that mineral by the federal government. So this was the first time we had ever seen uranium put on that in 2025. So that was very concerning. So Jara Mesa is a conventional underground mine. So in situ leach mining will not be used on this project. Neither will horizontal mining. It's going to be a conventional mine, just like the ones we've seen in the area for decades. So why are we concerned about this? Groundwater is a big reason. Leona was mentioning that there's so many other sites around that have been contaminated, and a lot of those have destroyed some of the groundwater resources. Right now, Grants and Milan relies heavily on the SAG aquifer, the San Andrea Gloria aquifer, and that provides all the drinking water for both Grants and Milan. That's being threatened right now by the Homestake Mill site, a Superfund site, and it's the last resource available. The rest of them have been contaminated over the decades. So we're really concerned about any potential contamination in the groundwater, given that there's so few amount of clean groundwater left. Of course, this is a conventional uranium mine. That means miners going underground. We're very concerned about the work conditions and air quality from radon. We're very concerned about the transportation issue. Leona was mentioning Navajo Nation choosing to regulate instead of ban transport of uranium across their lands. So that could include ore coming off this mine. It would likely all be sent to the White Mesa facility or the Energy Fuels mill near White Mesa, which is a Ute Mountain Ute community in southeastern Utah. So we're really concerned about everyone along that haul route, about our neighbors in White Mesa, our Ute Mountain Ute neighbors. And then of course, as was mentioned a couple times, this is a culturally significant site to many Pueblos, to our Dene relatives, and we're really concerned about the damage that this could do to that site. So Jara Mesa still needs some state permits. It's likely a few years away from breaking ground. However, they've started to move on some of these permits. And these state permits are really critical because we've seen other mines, like the one in Utah, already break ground because the state isn't doing much to regulate, and the federal government right now isn't doing much regulating of uranium mining. So it's really important we hold our state accountable to do their jobs and kind of fill that void in regulation that's coming under the Trump administration. So we have seen them starting Section 106 tribal consultations, including a consultation with the Pueblo of San Felipe and the Pueblo of Acoma, completed in 2025 and 2024, respectively. They're still planning to consult with the Pueblo of Laguna and Pueblo of Zia. There is a deadline for tribes to request consultation of March 1st. So if you're an elected member to your tribal government, or you know someone that is, let them know that we want to see more tribal consultation. And right now they're working on submitting their mining operations reclamation plan to the Mining and Minerals Natural Resources Division. So that's what you're going to get the opportunity to comment on tonight. So I'll pass it to Wendy for a minute to talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Ava. Again, my name is Wendy Atsity, and I am a staff member to the Southwest Research and Information Center. So thank you again for joining in. And so Ava just discussed one of the pieces called MORP. And so MORP is meant to say Mining Operations or Reclamation Plan. So basically, it's a large document that's required by the state and federal regulatory agencies, and it details how a mining operation is conducted and how the land will be restored afterward. So MORP is a crucial component for the permitting process as it ensures environmental impacts are minimized and the site is returned to a safe, productive, and stable condition. So with laramide, some questions come up to how would they mine uranium? How will they clean up the mine after it ends? And so it has been submitted to MMD, which is New Mexico Mining and Minerals Division, and they said it is complete. So complete just means the paperwork's filled out, but no final approval has been given. And more again is just only one piece of a larger mine permit application. So I believe the MMD sent this press release talking about this MORP that it has been reviewed. And so it still needs to be reviewed under other technical and state agencies. So that's a piece about looking at MORP. Next slide. So in this next slide, we have here, I can give this over to one of our other presenters to share about this.
Yeah, so as we're kind of moving along this timeline of what this application process has gone through and where it's at right now, back in 2024, the All Pueblo Council of Governors published a resolution and a letter of opposition for this specific mine, La Jara Mesa. And this just kind of gives you an idea of how tribes and tribal entities are engaging with this project or proposed project. So this letter was submitted, like I said, in 2024, and you can see a list of all the pueblos that were involved with this process. Along with APCG, the Pueblo of Acoma also submitted a letter of opposition regarding the La Jara Mesa mine specifically.
Thank you, Alicia. So in this slide, the Navajo Nation, they have a legislative priority they set with the state of New Mexico. And so as far as their 2026 one, they did mention under the natural resources, a section that pertains to Mount Taylor in areas of recognize and preserve the nation's cultural sites and resources, which are included but not limited to Mount Taylor. So that's a piece of important area of showing the nation is aware. But at the same time, there has been two recent Navajo Nation agencies that passed resolutions. And this is from the Eastern Agency, which holds 31 chapters, and a Northern Agency that holds 19 chapters. So that's like a combination of 50 chapters. And if you know the Navajo Nation that spans across 3 states of Arizona, Utah, and New Mexico, they hold over 100 and they hold at least 110 chapters. So we're more than half that is sharing a resolution. And this resolution is basically saying opposing laramide resources of La Jara Mesa uranium mine near Mount Taylor, which we call, so it's ill, traditional cultural property, and opposes transport uranium through Navajo Nation and Diné communities. So in this resolution, it really lays out the areas that like Ava was saying, the transport to White Mesa is going to be not is going to be prohibited, along with just any type of extraction of uranium mining, and so it really is good in laying that piece of information out. Next slide.
And just for the sake of time, I'll just leave this up and let people look at it, but not go over it in a ton of detail. But we were saying that this is one step in the permitting process, and you can see where it is on this. And these are all the permits they still need to complete, public hearings, financial assurance. So this is still going to be a long process, and I think this will help emphasize that. And yeah, we can keep going with our action for tonight.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. So yeah, that's just a little, or not a little, but that was a lot of information regarding like, all the history behind this, specifics to this mine and what the state application process looks like and where it's going next. I think something I learned too is that uranium stuff does move pretty slow, but it's still really important for us to for the communities to voice their concerns or where they're feeling like in relations to this project. And yeah, I think it's just really important to note that um, I don't know, with nuclear stuff specifically, there's just already so much that has happened with uranium mining or with weapons testing and things like that. We just have a really um, robust, I guess, legacy of nuclear colonialism here in New Mexico. And because of that, people all across the state, indigenous communities, non-indigenous communities, are facing the health consequences as well as we're having to deal with the lack of remediation and cleanup that from past abandoned mines. And I think that's what something that we really want to uplift too is that our communities haven't seen justice from those times, even 40, 50 years later, coming from my tribes in Laguna and Acoma, our people are um, experiencing like really high rates of cancer, kidney failure. The waterways in our lands are contaminated with radioactive contaminants. The soil around the areas are contaminated, and we really don't know to what extent this contamination exists due to the lack of research that exists. Um, However, there is like ongoing projects currently with UNM Research Group, the UNM Metals, and some past research that has been done with the Navajo cohort birth study. So we're just barely now understanding just the impacts that our land and our communities have experienced from mining, milling, all the whole fuel cycle. And so, when it comes to your letters, we really want you to personalize it as well. Like, include like where your community is or where you're coming from geographically and how this impacts you and your family. You can also bring in your personal expertise with whatever background that you come from, what career or research you have done, or just your personal lived experience is just as valuable as well. And it can be powerful for our state departments to read those firsthand accounts. And so we hope that you all have been drafting up a letter this far. There is an option to send this via email to this email that's listed here. There's also an option to hand in a physical letter or mail in one. And that mailing address can be found in this toolkit that Pueblo Action Alliance has put together. And if you need help starting up a draft or you don't know how to address it, then there's a link I'll drop down here and it has a letter template. So you can kind of get you started with something so you don't have to start from scratch. And as for the deadline, we did initially think that February 10th was the deadline, given that that is 30 days from when the public notice was released, which was January 12th. However, on the MNerd website, it does say comments can go until February 17th. But the thing is, these kinds of processes can be really confusing, and I don't think they're really meant to be as accessible as they claim to be. There's just conflicting information happening. I even tried to call the New Mexico Mining and Minerals Division today to get some clarification on why they're saying February 17th is the deadline when February 10th is 30 days from when they let the public know. And even the person I was talking to didn't know why there was that conflicting information. So, we just are encouraging people to submit a letter tonight or tomorrow morning. So just still keep that on your list of priorities to get that done sooner than later. Um, let's see, if we go to the next slide, we are at 6:45 now, so we want to give some time for our attendees and participants to drop any questions you have in the chat, or if you would like to come off mute and have some questions for all of our guest speakers who spoke today, then now is your time. And we also want to again thank everybody for taking the time out of their Monday night to be with us.